before the sea withdrew from the black shores, before the volcanoes learned to sleep beneath their own ash, the islanders of Vaelora carved no monuments for their dead. They believed stone remembered too loudly. Instead, they gave the dying small things: shells polished by tide, beads cut from bone, red coral pulled from reefs that grew around drowned fire vents. These were not ornaments, they were doors. Among those relics, one charm was feared above all others. It was a small amulet of deep coral, carved into the shape of a narrow, eyeless face. Its surface was warm, even in rain. Thin black lines ran through it like old smoke trapped beneath skin. When held to the ear, it did not echo the sea. It breathed. The elders called it the Ashcoral Veil of the Last Passage, though few spoke that name after sunset. It was made for those who had reached the edge of death but had not yet been claimed, not to save them fully, not to restore what war, fever, flame, or hunger had already taken. It gave only enough life for one final crossing. A little breath, a little blood, a little warmth against the dark. And when the wearer's body failed, the charm did not let death find them easily. The first bearer was Navaa, a reef walker born during an eruption that turned noon black. Her village survived by learning the language of danger. They knew which birds fled before poison gas rose from cracks in the earth. They knew which pools boiled beneath clear water. They knew that fire was not only flame, but hunger wearing light. Navaa was not a warrior then. She was a keeper of the dying fire, one of those who sat beside the injured when healers had done all they could. She fed the mortar, drop by drop. She cooled burns with sea clay. She listened to final words and carried them to families who could not bear to hear them directly. But one season, raiders came from the northern glass coast. They burned the fishing huts first, then the grain stores, then the boats. The village fighters stood between the raiders and the children, but iron and fire moved faster than courage. Navaa ran through smoke until her hands blistered. She dragged 3 people from a collapsed shrine. She carried a boy whose lungs were already full of ash. By dawn, her own skin had split from heat. Her breath rattled. Her feet left blood on the sand. Still, she refused to fall, while anyone beside her remained alive. That was when the reef answered. The story says Navaa crawled to the tide line and pressed her burned palms into the water. There, beneath a sheet of floating ash, she saw red coral glowing in the shallows. No diver had planted it. No elder had blessed it. It grew from black volcanic stone, where nothing living should have survived. Its branches curled like fingers around a pocket of trapped warmth, pulsing slowly, as if the reef itself had grown a heart. Navaa broke one branch free. The moment she touched it, the pain did not vanish. It became distant, her breathing steadied by a thread. Blood slowed in her veins. Her body, which should have emptied itself into the sand, held together for a little longer. Not healed, held. She carried the coral back through smoke and ruin. Every step should have been her last. Yet something inside the coral gave her a thin measure of life again and again, like drops falling into an almost empty bowl. When raiders found her among the wreckage, they laughed at first. Then their arrows missed. Their blades passed too late through the space where she had just been. Their torches guttered when they came near. Navaa moved like a figure half remembered by the world. Not fast, not strong, but impossible to seize when death stood closest behind her. After the raiders were driven back into the sea caves, Navaa did not celebrate. She knew the coral had not spared her out of kindness. It had marked her. For 7 nights, she dreamed of a road made of cooling embers. At the end of it waited a tall shadow crowned with smoke. Not cruel, not merciful, only patient. Whenever Navaa tried to see its face, the coral against her throat grew hot enough to burn. On the 8th morning, she carved the coral. She gave it no eyes, because the dead should not be watched like prisoners. She gave it no mouth, because final words belong to the living. She carved only a narrow face with hollow cheeks and a smooth brow, then bound it with cord darkened in funeral ash. When she wore it, her wounds closed more slowly than they should have, but they closed. Her body carried more life than it had any right to carry. Flame bent away from her skin, as though the charm remembered the burning village and refused to let fire take the same soul twice. Yet its true power woke only when Navaa stood near death. When blood loss weakened her, the amulet drew a veil around her body. Enemies lost the certainty of her shape. Spears struck where she had been. Hands passed through her cloak. She could slip between men's smoke and shadow, as though the world had loosened its grip on her. The elders understood then. The charm did not defeat death. It confused death long enough for unfinished duty. Word of the Ashcoral Veil spread beyond Vaelora. Wounded hunters came first, then exiles. Then warriors who believed the charm could make them immortal. They begged Navaa to carve more, but she refused. The reef had given only one branch, and she would not wound it again, so they tried to steal it. The first thief was found alive at dawn, kneeling in shallow water, unable to explain how he had walked there from Navaa's hut without remembering a single step. The second fled into the lava fields and survived 3 days without food, claiming a faceless red figure followed behind him, always just beyond sight. The third managed to wear the amulet during a duel. For a moment, it worked. When his opponent cut him deep, his body blurred. He became difficult to strike. Firelight slid from his skin. His wounds held closed by a thread of borrowed life. Then he laughed. He thought death had lost him. The charm went cold. The next blow found him cleanly. Navaa buried him herself and placed no marker above the grave. From that day forward, she taught one law. The veil answers only those who still carry another life inside their duty. A child to protect, a warning to deliver, a final promise to keep. It does not serve vanity. It does not reward hunger. It does not hide cowards from the end they earned. Navaa wore the Ashcoral Veil for many years. She walked through burning fields to gather the wounded. She crossed battle lines unseen when smoke covered the moon. She entered plague houses where even priests would not step. People began to say she could not die, but Navaa knew the truth better than anyone. Every time the charm saved her, it took her closer to the road of embers. Her reflection faded first, then her shadow, then her footprints in wet sand. By the end, children could look directly at her and forget her face a moment later. Dogs would not bark when she passed. Flames leaned away from her like grass in wind. On her final night, the volcano above Vaelora opened again. The mountain split with a sound like a god breaking its teeth. Fire ran down the slopes toward the rebuilt village. The people fled to the boats, but one bridge collapsed, trapping the young and old on the inland side. Navaa was already dying by then. Her lungs were weak, her hands trembled, her sight had narrowed to red light and black smoke. Still, she put on the Ashcoral Veil. The charm pulsed once. A little breath returned, a little strength entered her bones. A thin skin of impossible survival wrapped around her fading body. She walked into the falling ash. Those who survived, said Navaa, crossed the burning bridge after it had already fallen. They saw her shape flicker in and out of the smoke, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes only a red glimmer where a heartbeat should be. Children clung to her hands. Elders leaned on her shoulders. Fire washed over them, but the heat broke around the charm at her throat. When stones fell, she was not where they landed. When flame reached for her, it found only smoke. When death came down the mountain, it could not see her clearly enough to take her. One by one, she led the trapped villagers to the shore. On the last crossing, she carried a newborn wrapped in a wet cloak. The child lived. Navaa reached the sand, placed the infant in its mother's arms, and smiled as though she had finally heard a voice calling from very far away. Then the amulet slipped from her neck. For the first time in years, her shadow returned. The people saw her clearly, only for a moment. Then ash passed between them, and she was gone. No body was found, no bones, no burned cloth. Only the Ashcoral Veil remained in the sand, warm to the touch, its eyeless face turned toward the sea. Generations later, the amulet passed from hand to hand, but never stayed long with the strong. It was found around the necks of scouts who crawled home with warnings no one else survived to deliver. It appeared beside healers who spent their last strength closing another person's wound. It vanished from treasure rooms and reappeared in the pockets of children lost in burning forests. Those who wore it spoke of the same sensation, a slow return of life when the body should have failed, a stubborn warmth beneath the ribs, a strange resistance to flame. And when the final threshold came near, the world loosened. Walls felt thinner, arrows seemed uncertain. Enemies forgot where to strike. For a few stolen breaths, the wearer became less like flesh and more like a farewell moving through smoke. The Ashcoral Veil did not promise survival. It promised passage, not away from death forever, but through the narrow space before death, where one last act could still matter. And that is why the old islanders never called it a charm of protection. They called it a door, small enough to wear at the throat, heavy enough to carry a soul, warm enough to guide the dying where the fire could not follow.